An important content note before we get going, this video frankly discusses a handful of issues surrounding the concept of consent. If you have a sensitivity to consent-related content because of past experiences, your spider senses are probably already tingling. I've created time markers in the description that you might find helpful if you choose to keep watching. Additionally, miles here will pop up on the screen when the content is about to get swifty. The last thing I want to do is alienate or re-traumatize audience members. Please take note of how you're feeling before and while you're watching. Thank you, and I love you. I love Naruto, and I hate myself, so a few years back I began the uphill battle that is Boruto. For those of you who don't know, Bolt is Naruto's kid, and the creative team behind his story capitalizes so hard on Naruto's nostalgia that they've been able to stitch together one of the most incomprehensible anime plots I've ever seen. But of course, I and the entire Naruto stan community have and do watch it. The process is arduous, but the show has its moments. And one of the best moments in BORUTO, and perhaps in anime history, arrives in Season 1, Episode 61, the Iron Sand User, Shinki. Let's watch.
お前は忍者失格だ。行くぞ。説教は後だ。後で説教。父ちゃんに本当にそんな時間があんのかよ。ちゃんと向き合ってくれてたら。今こんな状況にはなってねえってばさ。
I think I rewound that clip like 7 times so I could relive that catharsis over and over again. I even text my sister about it. She has no ties to the anime community whatsoever, but I was like, hey look, they said it, they called out the shitty anime dad, they fucking did it. And she was like, cool. I hadn't felt this kind of joy since the audio punched Jin in the face for being a negligent prick and the entire stadium cheered and then elected him president. The scenes are like heroin to me. And by now you probably keep looking at the title wondering if you're hallucinating or something. Why am I talking about anime dads in the waifu video? Well, what if I told you that the reason you cheer when Bronco does this is the same reason you should stop worshipping her and buying these. That's right, it's all connected, and it's about time we talk about it. According to my research, what makes a waifu really seems to boil down to kink. There are so many different kinds of waifus and tsunderes, and weebs just seem to select from these categories the character they'd most like to wife up with. There are still, however, a few standout, high-ranking waifus, yes, they rank them on tier lists like their fucking wife beneath Futano, who come up a lot. Waifus are typified overwhelmingly by their love, admiration, and unrelenting loyalty to a character, no matter what. The physical traits of a waifu are less crucial to my argument, but you better believe there are tier lists for those too. That said, personality and relationship dynamics are all I'll be discussing today. So for my waifu case study, I've chosen to analyze Hinata Hyuga. And if you're wondering why I didn't choose her, it's because I haven't watched Re:Zero, and so I can't conduct an accurate analysis of her character arc. I'd love to hear from Rem stans though, whether or not what I argue in the case of Hinata holds true for Rem as well. Another reason I've chosen Hinata is because not only do you see her and Naruto's relationship develop in the core storyline, but you also get to see a contemporary portrait of their relationship as adults in Bolero. Hinata came in the top ranks of a few waifu tier lists, and if you dive in further into the literature, which I strongly suggest you don't, you'll find that Hinata is also subcategorized as a tsunderes, or a quiet type, who admires silently from afar and barely speaks for fear of saying the wrong thing or embarrassing themselves. Although the show is clear that Hinata likes Naruto from the beginning, her relationship with him develops through 4 key moments within the entire fucking 700-odd episode run. Naruto saves her from bullying, Naruto is really good at fighting during the Chunin exams, Naruto fights pain, and finally, the last, Naruto the movie. Although Hinata's affections are clear, we interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you this breaking news report.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a dumb white bitch. Stunning reports out of the Midwest today where out of thin air an elephant seemed to materialize in the middle of a residential home. We go now live to Weeb Crit on the scene. Weeb, what's been the response to the elephant in the room?
Thanks, dumb bitch. You know, you'd never know that there was an elephant in this room by the way the guests are acting. It was mere moments ago that during this fairly small viewing party, this elephant, which you can clearly see behind me, appeared out of absolutely nowhere. Since I've been on the scene, though, none of the members of the party seem to want to acknowledge this animal.
Wow, that's pretty incredible to believe, Weeb. Has the elephant done anything since appearing that would cause concern from the guests?
An insane question to ask given the circumstances, bitch, but yes, the elephant has caused quite the commotion. When I first arrived on the scene, there was quite a nice spread of snacks and dips on this back table here, which the elephant has since completely destroyed. If the cameraman just pans down a little bit here, you can see baby carrots and pita bites strewn all across the floor.
Oh, wow.
Even more disturbing, bitch, is the elephant has completely obstructed the visibility of the screen, making the entire purpose of this viewing party moot, and yet the guests continue to mill about as if nothing has happened.
Thank you, Weeb. We will be back to check in with you later on, but for now, we return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
The show does not divulge that Naruto likes Hinata back until the movie. In the entire series, not once, until the movie. In fact, Naruto seems to share the same amount of love and devotion towards Hinata that he shows every single other character, even the one-off characters in filler arcs. If we were to use Naruto's affection alone as an indication of who he ought to marry, he'd be marrying Sasuke. Everyone knows this. And since viewers really only get to see the relationship matriculate through Hinata's growing pseudo-obsession, the implication is that relationships really only need one person to be in love to work. The unyielding loyalty and love Hinata shows for Naruto is enough to differentiate her from every other person in the village and beyond. There is no deeper connection here. There is only Hinata's love. Oh, and the same thing is happening with Sakura, but apparently she's not waifu material because everyone hates her. For good reason, but I mean, that still kinda sucks. So fast forward to backgammon. After Naruto and Hinata have been married, we see Hinata as a stay-at-home mother while Naruto is off living his best Hokage life. Sakura as well, though she's more of a single mother at this point because Sasuke's out on planet I do whatever I want, investigating things that 100+ episodes in, I still don't really understand. Putting aside that these women are some of the most powerful fucking ninja in the goddamn world, they rarely if ever see their husbands. Sasuke is so detached from his family that he literally tries to kill his own daughter when she pops into bond with him because he doesn't know who the fuck she is. And here's where the bad dad tropes come into play. Neither of these women were ever shown to demand reciprocal affection from their partner. They never ask for it. Hinata is moved to a shocked state of tear-filled silence when Naruto confesses his love for her because it's legitimately shocking. I was shocked. How? Why? When? There's no intimacy between these characters, and there's -7 intimacy between these two. So why should we be surprised when that same lack of emotional intelligence, presence, and general good personship extends into their parenting? Suddenly, all of the absentee fathers, the swaths of anime dads who we've come to hate because of how their absence scarred our favorite plucky shonen protagonists, or unplucky, make a disturbing amount of sense. Anime dads aren't there because they've never had to be, not for their partners and not for their kids. And even though practically every single shonen anime ever has asked us to in some way sympathize with a child who's been emotionally neglected or abused by their fathers their entire lives, we've never been asked to consider the mother. But if Barnacle is sad all the time, how can we not question how Hinata feels? Or Sakura? Are we really supposed to just accept that they're sincerely as deliriously in love and happy as they say and have been for all this time? But wait, you're probably thinking, I like that you're analyzing these relationships in such depth and detail, but isn't the problem with waifus back in the real world and not in the anime world? Yes, you are correct. But I want to pick apart the fictional dynamics because I believe that it's not just Hinata's looks that draw weebs in. They're romanticizing these relational dynamics. They desire a kind of partnership wherein they don't need to show up emotionally or physically, but can still expect their partner to be there when they come home with a hot meal on the table. It's funny because when we see the same relationship dynamics presented in a male character, they're usually played for laughs. So there's clearly a gendered framework for how masculine and feminine partners ought to act in a relationship being drawn. And if you think back to my last video, you might recognize these gendered expectations and know how, historically, Japanese women have felt about them. A tsundere is a subtype of the waifu category, but not all waifus are tsunderes. Hinata is not a tsundere, for example. However, in this portion of the video, I plan to argue that, in fact, all tsunderes are waifus, as previously presented. Tsunderes are defined by how they express their undying love for the protagonist. While Hinata would loyally stand by your side and make you dinner every day, a tsundere might slap you, spit on you, dismiss you, or scream that she actually doesn't have any feelings for you at all. And if that's what you're into, I mean, okay, I don't kink shame, but I'm still gonna break it down. For this case study, we'll be looking at the one and only tsundere to end all tsunderes, Asuka Langley Soryu. I've seen Evangelion, and I hate it. First and foremost because of the relationship we see develop between anime's most iconic sad boy and Asuka. For those of you blessed enough to have lived this long without watching Evangelion, keep living your lives, please. It is so hard to watch their interactions and not call the therapy police, and this is part of why the tsundere relationship in anime needs to stop. Even though they may play out differently, in the tsundere situation, if we're to accept how these women who are refusing are actually in love with the men they hate, then we end up with the same emotional detachment and distance that we do with a waifu. They have an unrelenting love for their partner with no reciprocal emotional attachment, either because it's never been demanded from the other, or because it's literally been reprimanded. Evangelion, to its very little credit, shows how confusing these dynamics can be. Shinji is incredibly conflicted regarding his feelings for Asuka. He wants to be with her, and he's clearly physically attracted to her, but he communicates that he's confused by her feelings and isn't sure what to make of their relationship. Based on Asuka's traumatic backstory and the ongoing status of her as a child soldier, I think we could argue that she's suffering from PTSD, so her issues with intimacy or her inability to be affectionate with Shinji without simultaneously negging him might stem from these experiences. The abuse and eventual loss of her mother, as well as the loss of her partners through her status as a child soldier, have made it emotionally unsafe for her to express or receive intimacy. When the person you care about most is constantly at risk of being annihilated by a biblical monstrosity, why would you let yourself become attached at all? Asuka uses sarcasm, dismissiveness, and violence as a way to ensure that no one can get close to her, and in turn, she can't be emotionally devastated when they inevitably pass. The same is probably true for Shinji. Neither partner here seems happy. Asuka is screaming and depressed all the time, while Shinji is confused and also depressed all the fucking time. These relationship dynamics are toxic with a capital T, but Asuka still stands at the top of Mount Waifu, as men romanticize her behavior as something worth seeking in a relationship. I think part of this could be due to weeb's internalized sense of female inferiority. When affection is demonstrated in clearly female-coded ways, such as domesticity and subordination, some hyper-masculine men may be put off by these hyper-effeminate behaviors. After all, it may be the case that a hyper-effeminate partner could push for more effeminate behaviors from their partner, like emotional intimacy and communication. Therefore, the brash, powerful, and somewhat masculine-coded behaviors of the tsundere open the doors for a relationship with a woman, but not a woman, you know? A cool girl, pick-me type, as the youth of the day would definitely say. It's also worth noting that subordination is a kink, and so some men and women are validly attracted to being safely subordinated.
New reports in from our elephant party. We take you back to Weeb Crit on the scene. Weeb, have there been any developments since we last spoke?
Yes, Mitch, and I apologize if you can't hear me clearly, but I am forced to plug my nose as the elephant in the room has taken an absolutely massive shit directly on the rug.
Oh my god.
My god, indeed. The smell is similar to summer downwind of a dairy farm, and yet still the guests act as if nothing is going on.
Have you spoken with any of the guests, Weeb?
I have, bitch. I spoke with the host just a bit earlier, and it was as if I was speaking a different language. She made no mention of the elephant or the smell, but simply asked me when the report would be airing. When I asked her specifically about the animal, bitch, she just said 2 words. What elephant?
I can see the elephant behind you, though, Weeb. This is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, bitch, and as a devoted journalist, I promise to stay here in the snowy hell until answers are found.
Thank you for your bravery, Weeb. More comments from Weeb as the story develops.
Which is to say that a child like Asuka will put them in their place, but never challenge their status as the quote-unquote man in the relationship because of her tiny ladylike mind and body. And while these kinks are valid, that doesn't change the fact that Shinji and Asuka are in a toxic pattern of behavior. BDSM communities are known for their focus on consent, safety, and equitable partner relationships. Because of the intentional power imbalances that are played with during BDSM, participants are hyper-aware that these kinks are not and should not be pursued at the cost of mental and emotional health. Most tsundere relationships in shonen anime, though, are not written in a way that prioritize communication, equity, safety, or consent. Tsunderes are abusive, and that's not a healthy way of showing or receiving affection. And speaking of consent, I work in education, and I had the privilege to be educated in these great United States. And if you heard or continue to hear the Pledge of Allegiance every day at 7 a.m. for no good reason when you fucking just woke up and we don't need this kind of patriotism indoctrinated into us, thank you, American education system, well then you probably have no fucking clue what this is. The politics around sex education in the United States is, political. Statistics from the Guttmacher Institute report that, as of April 2023, 25 states and DC mandate both sex education and HIV education be taught. 30 states and DC mandate that when provided, sex and HIV education programs meet certain general requirements, with only 17 states requiring that those requirements be medically accurate. Only 4 states prohibit the program from promoting religion, which is wild because of the whole separation of church and state thing, but okay. 40 states and DC require school districts to involve parents in sex education, HIV education, or both, with 25 states and DC requiring parental notification that sex education or HIV education will be provided. 6 states require parental consent for their students to participate in sex education, and 35 states and DC allow parents the option to remove their child from instruction. But does this help kids understand consent? Well, that depends on how their state defines sex ed. You see, 40 states and DC require prevention of teen dating violence and sexual violence be covered. 24 states and DC require the provision of information on asserting personal boundaries and refusing unwanted sexual advances. And 11 states require the importance of consent to sexual activity be covered. 38 states and DC require provision of information on preventing, recognizing, and responding to teen dating violence and sexual violence, which is weird because, if only 11 out of 51 kids are learning about consent, then what the hell are the other 27 learning to recognize? Okay, so I'm not good at math, but it seems like maybe not all the kids are learning about consent in school. But every kid lives in a society, and will probably at some point have a sexually related question. So if their school isn't answering their questions, they could go to their parents, right? Blech, no, that would be so awkward. So where do the other kids go?
So they take all these thinkings, and then we look at what getting a yes means. Because that's what they understand. Yes is good. But when we think about how it works in practice with the tools that they've currently got, it looks a bit like this. Consent and sex and relationships are thought of in a linear way. So I like someone, I speak to them, I ask them out, hug them, kiss them, get the picture, maybe have sex. And when you think about getting a yes and applying it in something like this, then it just becomes an afterthought. And the reason why I put this here is because, yes, as we are grown, we might understand that relationships are much more. But young people learn from each other. As much as we like to think that parents are guiding them through life, or mentors are guiding them through life and showing them what relationships are really about, actually they learn from other children, especially boys and boys like me. So when you look at this linear process, you don't think about equal exchanges and how sex isn't just an end goal. In reality, relationships and sex are about ongoing exchanges between people and healthy communication. So we want to get them to a point where they can strip away of the current rules they have, but we have to challenge some pre-existing notions as well.
So that's what the youths should be learning, and it's clearly lacking. But good old Uncle Sam and his big legal Bible have our back, right? We adults have a clear definition in the law, right? Cornell gives us the legal definition of consent as a person voluntarily and willfully agreeing in response to another person's proposition. The person who consents must possess sufficient mental capacity, and consent also requires the absence of coercion, fraud, or error. Consent is an essential constituent of a contract and a defense to a tort. Wait, contract? I thought we were talking about sex. Sex isn't a contract, and only quite recently have legal proceedings emerged that classified sexual harassment or rape as a tort. And if you're not a lawyer, the concept of tort law is to redress a wrong done to a person and provide relief from the wrongful acts of others, usually by awarding monetary damages as compensation. The original intent of tort is to provide full compensation for proved harms. In general, any claim that arises in civil court, with the exception of contractual disputes, falls under tort law, but sexual harassment and rape are criminal offenses. Yeah, so unfortunately, because of this, there is no single legal definition of sexual consent in the United States. Each state sets its own definition either in law or through court cases. In general, there are three main ways that states analyze consent in relation to sexual acts. Affirmative consent. Did the person express overt actions or words indicating the agreement to sexual acts? Freely given consent. Was the consent offered of the person's own free will without being induced by fraud, coercion, violence, or the threat of violence? And capacity to consent. Did the individual have the capacity or legal ability to consent to the act? Perhaps the most well-known model for consent in sexual activity comes from Planned Parenthood, the fries model, because who doesn't love French fries? Fries stands for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Freely giving because consenting is a choice you make without pressure, manipulation, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Reversible because anyone can change their mind about what they feel like doing anytime. Informed because you can only consent to something if you have the full story. Enthusiastic because when it comes to sex, you should only want to do stuff you want to do, not the things that you feel you're expected to do. And specific. Saying yes to one thing doesn't mean you've said yes to other things, so we can see the clear similarities between common themes in state consent law and Planned Parenthood's framework, but plenty of scholars still aren't satisfied.
We're coming to you with a message that hasn't been expressed previously, and we're coming to you talking about the issues and problems and the non-protection we receive through a lot of concepts that are in legal language presently and in consent education. As Joyce was saying, the term enthusiastic consent, that's problematic. Yes means yes. Well, victims know that yes doesn't always mean yes. So when we have that codified into law, we're in trouble and we're not protected against the malicious influences that can be present. We also speak against no means no, and there's other kinds of catchphrases and hashtags. And of course, we can elaborate as we go along about why all of those are problematic, but they all circle back to being victim blaming and shaming, which is those concepts say that whether or not a crime has been committed is based on the words and actions of the victim. And this is completely backwards. And it's all about the causation of the malicious influence of the offender. And that's what we're trying to push back and let everybody know.
The biggest issue with most contemporary consent frameworks is that they rely heavily on the survivor's input in the situation, rather than centering the abuser. This perpetuates survivor blaming in trial courts and normalizes hyper-individualistic definitions of consent that don't take into consideration social context, power dynamics, or any other external factor that may contribute to a person unwillingly giving a yes. For the sake of my analysis, I'm going to use the fries model because it's simple and I love fries, with a few caveats though to determine whether or not Hinata and Asuka are capable of consenting in their given relationships. By doing so, I hope to demonstrate that no matter what the character says, the relational dynamics in each situation are bad and should not act as a basis for a relationship inside or out of anime.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
We're back live with the Midwest Elephant Mystery, where it seems guests are finally speaking out about the elephant in the room. Weeb, I can't help but notice you've unplugged your nose.
Astute observation as always, bitch. Yes, I've become used to the smell and honestly might be getting a bit of an inhalant high from the massive shit on the rug.
We'll be sure to get you out of there soon, Weeb. Any updates on the situation?
Well, bitch, I kinda got in the groove now, so I don't know if I want to leave yet. Might just see where the high takes me regarding the elephant. I'm excited to introduce you to my new friend, Barry. Barry, tell the people who you are. Hi, I'm Barry. I'm a guest at the viewing party. Delightful to have you here, Barry. Tell me what you told me earlier. Oh, okay, well, originally no one else was talking about the elephant, so I didn't want to be like that guy, you know? So I didn't want to say anything then, but like when it took a shit on the rug, I mean, I had to say something. You're so brave, Barry.
Weeb, does this mean we might have an answer to the mystery of where the elephant came from soon?
Well, bitch, I don't know if we're ever gonna have answers to anything in this life, but if we aren't talking about it, we certainly can't do anything about it, so I feel like me and Barry here are on the right track.
Great point, Weeb. That's all for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. For Channel 5 News, I'm a dumb white bitch. Stay safe out there.
They're children! The problem with waifus, tsunderes, and consent is that children cannot consent. I don't care if they're quote-unquote not real children. Stop normalizing pedophilia. This is a crime. Phew. Okay, let me explain. Australia banned waifus a few years back, and weebs lost their damn minds. The reason Australia cited was due to the prevalence of lolly-type characters and other minors being portrayed in sexually illicit situations, so the ban was made in an attempt to limit the access to and stop the normalization of child pornography. Podcasts and thought pieces on the matter that I will not dignify with a citation tended to revolve around the following themes. 1. A right or entitlement to porn, hentai, and sexual fantasies. Predominantly, male reactionaries were upset with this overreach on behalf of the government into the personal right they felt that they had to access hentai. This is pretty interesting, since it could be interpreted as an insistence on a person's right to sex or at least to sexual fantasies. It can't be overstated just how much this entitlement was coming from male reactionaries to the loss of media that overwhelmingly depicts heteronormative relationships with female subjects, though. So this entitlement to hentai mutates into a men's entitlement to depictions of women's bodies. This is crucial since the same communities who typically assert this right also often demonize women's and LGBTQIA identifying folks' sexuality, suggesting that only cis-het men have this right. 3. The idea that hentai doesn't depict real people, and so cannot cause real harm, and therefore should not be banned. Okay, so let's run with this argument. Did you weep like an infant at the end of the Chimera Ant arc? Were you pissed off and personally betrayed when Griffith betrayed Guts and his entire band of followers? Do you feel a sense of overwhelming joy and retribution when Bionicle shoves off his father's arm and screams that it's his neglect that's the reason why he's acting out in the first place?
Why?
Why do you feel that way? You're not looking at real events. You're not even looking at real people. You aren't looking at real boobs. None of this is real, so you should feel stupid for feeling those feelings. After all, fake fictional content can't cause any real-world feelings or issues. When female or effeminate or non-binary or any people look at hentai and are reasonably disgusted, it's for the exact same reasons. Self-identification, mirror neurons. And when Western weebs demonize this disgust, they're actively reinforcing the harm that they say doesn't exist. Weebs seem to want to assert that because the media they're consuming doesn't make them feel some type of way, it's irrational that it would cause harm to anyone else. It's a radically neoliberal, hyper-individualist conception of reality that, I mean, yeah, we live in a capitalist hellscape, what should I expect? But it's also the same line of thinking as point number 2, that a cis-het male should be entitled to the things that they like by way of subordinating or dismissing things that they don't like. That's right, man, it all comes back to white supremacist, capitalist cis-het patriarchy. And what does any of this have to do with consent? I bring this up because real-world perpetrators of abuse tend to hold beliefs about strict gender norms in relationships. When these roles are perpetuated in the media, we're only increasing the likelihood that a person will one day become an abuser, especially when, as I mentioned before, we don't have standards in education or even in law regarding what constitutes consent. I firmly believe that after Alyssa Milano appropriated the Me Too slogan from Tarana Burke in 2017 and white women in pop culture began to really rally behind the idea of positive representations of consent and relationships in media, we pretty quickly saw the explosion of America's second anime boom. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's hard not to give the conspiracy some credit when anime, and particularly shonen anime, is one of the fewer and fewer mediums that consistently and overwhelmingly depict firmly gendered character tropes in heteronormative relationship dynamics. And these depictions matter, because they inform how today's weebs approach relationships as a whole. Dr. Robin West, Frederick J. Haas Professor of Law and Philosophy and Associate Dean at the Georgetown University Law Center, has a piece in The Baffler about workplace sexual harassment and consent that honestly changed my life. I wish I could just read it verbatim, but that would be plagiarism and also very boring, so just gonna read a few sentences. Generally, sex that you have because if you don't, you might lose something you care deeply about, such as your job or your lease agreement or a meal or approval from a teacher or acceptance by your community or your husband or your boyfriend's good graces or civility, might be or feel coerced, but it is not, for that reason, rape. The law doesn't regard these forms of coercion as sufficiently immediate or frightening or threatening to life and limb to violate consent. Until that changes, there is a great deal of coercive sex procured through the exercise of power by basically threatening or withholding of something necessary or strongly desired performed by the coerced party that is legally regarded as consensual and therefore non-criminal. If unwelcome sex is a wrong, it's wrong whether imposed by husbands, strangers, co-workers, boyfriends, hookup dates, or acquaintances. The formulation of sexual harassment as unwelcome sex suggests, without explicitly claiming, that it is indeed a wrong, not only at work when under the gun of the employment contract, but generally so. And this same equation of unwelcome sex with harassment further suggests, again without explicitly claiming, that women themselves, not husbands and not men, own access to women's bodies. If West's argument for reconceiving of sexual harassment as unwanted sex sounds a bit radical to you, it's because it is. She's taking the stance that harassment and assault are the same thing, which all y'all semantic philosophers are probably hotly contesting in the comments as I speak. Given what we know about consent, or really what we don't know, can you clearly delineate between the two though? Really think about it for a second. Just like previously mentioned in the Something Was Wrong podcast, under our current legal system, the only seeming way to separate consensual activities from non-consensual activities is the survivor's feelings. This puts the onus on the survivor to justify beyond reasonable doubt that they did not want things to happen to them. And how do you prove that? How do you tangibly prove your internal reality to somebody? Have you ever gotten really high and had a conversation with your mates about whether or not all y'all are seeing the same colors? Is my green the same green as your green? It's literally impossible to know because you cannot communicate outwardly your inner experience in enough vivid detail that anybody around you could really understand what's going on in your head. Meanwhile, the perp on the stand just has to prove one thing, that the survivor said or reasonably implied yes. So when the burden of proof lies on one's capacity to prove the unprovable, it doesn't matter what the thing that happened to them was or what you want to call it. It's all treated the same under the law. West also challenges the validity of a yes under a white supremacist capitalist cishet patriarchy. Recently, the Panpsycast did an episode about love that touches on similar themes.
Throughout the book, she keeps referring back to this. Is it like a playground rhyme? Insert two names here, sit in a tree, chaos, ing. First comes love, then comes marriage. When I was at school, it was, and then comes a baby in a golden carriage. So she thinks that things like this, we taught children from a very young age that this is the norm and that this is what society pushes you towards. And she repeats that playground rhyme over and over again until in the last book she finally says, like, I'm not going to say it again. I was like, phew, thank God she didn't say it again. But the point being is that this influences what children think romantic love is like. And I was speaking to somebody in my own life recently who said, when you're going to propose to them, and not to me personally, they won't speak to me, when are you going to propose to them and when are you going to have children? And the person was like, well, I wasn't planning on doing either of those things. And this person said, well, that's what love is, right? And that's exactly what Carrie Jenks is talking about there.
Yeah, and I think she gives a good quote. It defines the tramlines along which we expect our relationship to run. It really is giving us this idea of how things are meant to go, and if they don't go that certain way, we might have a sense that we're not doing them right or that they're bound to fail.
Under a social constructivist view, West makes the point that there are a lot of racialized and gendered norms of performance in society that exponentially complicate the validity of a yes at any given point. The lines between clearly abusive behavior and performing your role as a good husband get quite fuzzy. This is why her framework is so crucial. It flips the scripts on the burden of proof and challenges us to critically examine the power dynamics between ourselves and our partners to reflect on our own expectations for gender performance in our relationships, and to question the motivations behind every single action. Instead of asking whether or not the survivor said yes, we have to ask the perpetrator what they did, why they thought they could do it, and what their motivations for doing it were. And if your brain is silly putty right now because you're trying to figure out if you've ever consented or received consent from anyone in your entire life, well, good. Welcome, comrade, to the path to liberation. So now back to Hinata. In the real world, in a scenario where a partner holds significant power over you because of how much you worship them, can you fully consent to their advances? No, because you're not consenting to the person. You're consenting to the fictionalized version of that person that's been conjured up in your head. You're basically a god, and consent cannot be freely given under circumstances of significant power differential. More importantly, in the short term, when this kind of relationship is romanticized and folks are encouraged to fall disproportionately in love with partners who cannot or will not reflect those feelings, they become vulnerable to quid pro quo abuse. But hold on, wait. I need to be careful not to blame the victim here, because that's antithetical to my mission as a feminist. So let's pivot to the husbando. When this kind of relationship is romanticized and folks are encouraged to accept disproportionate amounts of affection without any capacity or expectation of reflecting those feelings, they become vulnerable to becoming quid pro quo abusers. Your waifu loves you no matter what, right? And you might be saying, hang on, that's not quid pro quo abuse. And you're right, it's not. In the law, traditionally we're meant to think that this for that is a material exchange, let's say for money or fame or career success. But in a scenario where I see a person who's madly in love with me, to the extent that any inclination of affection from me feels to them, like money, fame, or career success, how is that not quid pro quo? I can give them a real nice thumbs up and maybe a kiss now and again, and in exchange I get a hot meal and sex whenever I want, and they'll never question it because they're deliriously in love with me? Well, why don't I just see how far I can take this? So let's pull up our french fry consent tally card. Was consent freely given? Maybe. Hinata really did did like Naruto, but because we literally never see Naruto reciprocate those affections, and also because he's the strongest ninja in the world who is also the president, there's a clear power imbalance here, and one that makes it difficult to argue that Hinata can consistently, freely consent. Can consent be reversed? I genuinely don't think so. Again, because of the power imbalance. Many women become trapped in abusive or otherwise unfulfilling marriages because of the economic benefits they receive from their partnership. If they were to pull out of those relationships, suddenly they'd be at a loss for shelter, income, and perhaps access to their family members. Was consent informed? No. The imagined person that a waifu type falls for is just that, imagined, and by necessity that entails that their undying loyalty is an ignorant one. While it may sound romantic to love your partner forever no matter what, when what turns out to be an eternity of emotional neglect or physical abuse, then that initial ignorance turns out to be really quite problematic. Was consent enthusiastic? Maybe from Hinata, but not from Naruto. And in this framework, Naruto has a clear and exploitable path to abuse Hinata, and so we cannot say that Hinata has any capacity to consent, whether she's excited about the relationship or not. Finally, was consent specific? No. Coming from a necessary position of ignorance, the waifu type cannot specifically give consent to anything. An undying loyalty should never, ever, ever mean implied consent for whatever, whenever. Real relationships require ongoing communication and consent. Tsunderes are in the same boat, and are perhaps more vulnerable than their docile waifu counterparts. In a waifu partnership, we at least have an illusion of consent. Hinata agreed to marry Naruto, and she seems pretty content being a stay-at-home ninja mom. Hopefully after reading West's article, you can understand why that's still kind of problematic, but for the sake of argument, let's begrudgingly accept that Hinata is a trad wife TikTok superstar who loves performing her gender role and doesn't need emotional intimacy from no man. What about Asuka? She's clearly not happy, and neither is Shinji. We've already covered how toxic this relationship is, but can consent still emerge within it? A 2003 study on men's belief in token resistance, or the belief that sometimes no really means yes, predictably influenced how those participants differentiated rape from consensual sex, with participants who had stronger beliefs in token resistance being less likely to interpret a situation where no was uttered as a non-consensual encounter. Let's go back into the Imagitarium to unpack this a bit. I'm with my emotionally distant yet nonetheless unrelentingly loyal love interest, and I'm feeling like things are going well, so I started dancing. They say, "LOL, no, stop," and playfully push me away, but that's just how our relationship is. They're always shoving me and dismissing me, so I keep going. They start to push me away a little bit more forcefully and quietly say, "Wait, no, stop," with no LOL this time. It's so cute when this side of them comes out and they get all red-faced and quiet, so I keep advancing more. The physical pushes stop, and so do the audible ones. They go completely still and quiet. That's the green light, right? No resistance at all? Toxic as it is, the real threat of the tsundere trope, just like the waifu one, is how it inequitably distributes power between parties in the relationship. The advancer sees dismissiveness, negativity, and no as potential signs of affection, meaning that no matter what their partner says, they have a green light. The person being advanced upon loses all capacity to refute advances, since common sense language games no longer communicate what they're trying to say. When we internalize that no can sometimes mean yes, suddenly we don't have a word for no. We don't have a way to express non-consent. So now it's time to grade this relationship for consent. No, JK, no fries needed. Asuka and Shinji are children, and children with debilitating mental illness like that. Neither of them are capable of consenting, and this relationship is toxic at best and abusive at worst. The fact that people romanticize this shit and that these two end up together in the finale is literally the most tragic thing in anime history. Their responsibility to repopulate the world under this framework seems to doom humanity to loveless families filled with physical, mental, and emotional abuse. Is that the point? I feel like that can't be the point that they're trying to make. This show fucking sucks, and I hate it.
Editor Weeb here. I wanted to cut in to clarify that it's not merely masculine identifying people or anime as a medium that perpetuate these norms in relationships. Feminine identifying people abide by these norms as well, and everyone is harmed by the perpetuation of these norms. I want to say this because I do feel as though I'm coming in pretty heavy-handed against, seemingly masculine identifying folks, and especially masculine identifying anime fans, but I also think that I'm coming in pretty heavy-handed against feminine identifying people who think that these tropes best represent them. So to kind of elaborate further on West's point, the social scripts that exist in the world prior to our own existence in the world come from people who we never knew, organizations that we were never a part of, and we didn't consent to exist in conversation with these social scripts. And that's kind of West's point. We're not consenting in her definition when we're simply abiding by these social scripts, because it's a thoughtless exercise to simply go along with what we've been told we ought to do. However, sometimes the abiding of those social scripts is necessary for survival, is necessary for safety, and so we can't demonize folks who abide by these social scripts, or who feel, again, authentically represented by them. That's not the point. The point is merely to put up for conversation whether or not our abiding by these social scripts is our authentic choice, or if it's merely something that we're doing to protect our own privilege, to protect our own safety, our own survival, or, what have you. And in questioning that, we're bringing to the fore the idea that there are social scripts that exist outside of, us as people. This is not an innate function of our being as people, these scripts. It's a product of all of these societies and, white supremacist capitalists, cishet patriarchy. patriarchy. So problematizing consent in this framework is not intended to, poo-poo anyone who does authentically identify with these. It's merely intended to kind of open that conversation. Why are you abiding by these social scripts? Is it a fair balance? Is it an equitable practice for all folks in your community to abide by these social scripts? Are you being personally helped? Is your community being collectively helped by your positioning in alignment with these social scripts? And that sort of question is intended to liberate us from the script in and of itself. It's forcing us to be in conversation with others in our community to really authentically question not only our own abidance and, how we're affected by those social scripts, but also how we collectively are negotiating these scripts and how their performance or our adherence to these scripts empowers or disenfranchises different folks in our collective. So yeah, I wanted to cut in to say that just because I do feel as though I came off pretty bad against masculine identifying folks in this video, and for good reason. There are a lot of problematic tropes that are upheld ferociously by masculine identifying people. But that said, I do hope that this channel is a space where masculine identifying people can, feel comfortable in questioning how and why they have always abided by these tropes. And I want to make it a quote unquote safe space for people to strip away those tropes or strip away those ideas and be vulnerable and question, why do I believe this and who am I helping apart from myself when I believe these things? And I definitely don't think that initially this video was as positive or as safe a space as it could have been. So apologies to anyone who felt personally attacked in this video, but also I'm not going to apologize, so I retract my apologies. You do need to be questioning these things, but I hope that I can create a space, at least, through this channel, where questioning these things doesn't feel like a personal attack.
Up until this point, I've been talking about consent in very broad ways as it could apply to any relationship, but the truth is the kind of harm that comes from these kinds of character tropes does not affect everyone equally. You may remember the tragedy that befell 6 women of Asian descent back in 2021. Jiao Ji-tan, Dayo Fang, Hyun Jung Grant, Soon Chung Park, Sun Cha Kim, and Young A Yue had their lives stolen from them due to one man's racialized fetish. Writing for the 34th Street in 2018, Angela Huang and Ariana McGinn cite dating application data shows that men of all races, except Asian men, respond the most to Asian women on dating apps. On Pornhub's top search terms in 2017, hentai ranked 2nd on the list, Japanese ranked 8th, and Asian ranked 14th. These statistics speak to a larger problem that writers and academics describe as Asian fetishization. We briefly explored in my previous video the history of America's occupation in Japan. Nyan Hu, Crimson staff writer, explains that approximately 200,000 Japanese women were enslaved by Japan as prostitutes and serviced American soldiers at the end of the war under the Recreation and Amusement Association. This practice continued through the Korean and Vietnam Wars, with 85% of American soldiers reporting having sought a prostitute. As a result, some of the first encounters American soldiers had with Asian women were in the context of being sexually serviced. To them, the women were nothing but commodities. Takazato Suzuyo's Okinawan Women Against Military Violence organization deals directly with this history as they work to liberate Okinawa and the rest of Japan from ongoing military occupation. This history teaches us that the sort of fetishization we see of Asian women on dating apps and in porn is not simply a preference. It's a system of racialized sexual violence grounded in our two countries' military histories, exacerbated and perpetuated by Japanese commodification and American consumption of depictions of women in Japanese cultural exports like anime. There are a lot of articles, thought pieces, and Reddit discussion threads by Asian and Asian American people breaking down their experiences with racialized violence from anime fans that you can check out in the links below. The work that impacted me most, however, was an article written about weeb Asian fetishes by an Asian American high school student who had received a quote-unquote compliment from a guy about how she looked like a lolly, before reviewing the same military history and dating app statistics that I've presented here, a high school student, which brings us all the way back to Australia's child pornography ban. These aren't just harmless pictures that hold no bearing over how people live and act in the real world. And if you're still not convinced of that, check out Robin Zhang's article published by the American Philosophical Association, where they clearly articulate why personal preferences are just as morally objectionable as racialized stereotypes when those preferences disproportionately harm a specifically racialized community of people. In my last video, which you should definitely watch, I made a tongue-in-cheek remark about how weebs don't like feminist critique because learning about it might ruin their relationship with their underage waifus. This was not a mere tongue-in-cheek remark. This was a seed that I intentionally planted so that I could call back to it now because I'm a self-referential master of content creation. The ideas I've presented today should make weebs very uncomfortable, both for the way they've conceived of relationships with the people they're idolizing, as well as for how they've been actively or passively contributing to the normalization of racialized sexual harm against Asian and AAPI communities. While issues with relational power differentials and consent are applicable to everyone, we cannot forget that anime is a Japanese cultural export, and in the Orientalist minds of American consumers, that means that the things they see in anime must of course apply to the real-life East Asian and AAPI community members they see walking around, whether they're Japanese or not, because who has the time to learn the difference? But of course, it is not, cannot, and will never be the sole responsibility of AAPI community members to educate others about the harm that these gendered and racialized stereotypes cause. The harm is real. These experiences, the feelings, they're all real. Anyone and everyone's feelings are valid. When Bobo over here pushes Naruto's arm away and you and I stand up and cheer, those feelings are valid. And just as valid are the feelings of disgust, discomfort, and pain that women, and especially AAPI people, express when they're bombarded with fictional depictions and real-life aggression that comes from anime and anime fans. And in both cases, racialized and gendered tropes sit at the center of responsibility. And let me just hone back on Bakugo and his shitty dad one more time. You, yes you, all of us deserve better than this. And even though some of y'all might not think of it as that bad, we deserve better than this too. Pre-existing social norms around relationships and how partners should behave within them were made up centuries ago by a bunch of landlords and religious zealots in stupid hats. These norms are dangerous, not only to femme partners, but also to masc partners who are shutting out aspects of their humanity to fit into emotionless, hypermasculine gender roles.
We, as men, also need to do better. We have to have those difficult conversations with our friends and the people that look up to us. We can't keep on hiding from things and sweeping things under the rug. We have to reinforce it in our everyday interactions and move away from a linear approach to relationships and consent and this thing that you just tick off. To empower them to think that consent isn't just something I get from someone, something that I tick off and win and take, but it's something I want to give and want to receive. And you do that by actually showing them how relationships could be and giving them that real advice. So we've talked about practical things. This is a more long-term goal. If you hold relationships like this, where clear communication is important to you, where you listen to what your partners are saying, where you hear what they're saying and acknowledge it, where you respect boundaries that you put up for each other, and also respect them when you hear what you don't want to hear too. It's about equal exchanges. Sex isn't just an end goal, but it's also supposed to be enjoyed by everyone involved. And lastly, that relationship is a lot more than what I want and me. And it's about us, what we want, how we talk to each other, how we respect each other, how we exchange our emotions. And when you base relationships off this, giving and receiving consent becomes a core part of what they are. It's really important that they understand this and that we, as men, seek relationships out like this as well so they can see what it looks like in practice.
So if one of y'all is giving 5% to the relationship while the other is giving over 9,000, or if that's what you're looking for, I really want you to ask yourself, why? If you're putting up with hot and cold physical, mental, and emotional abuse, why are you tolerating or looking for the same physical or emotional disconnect that all of those shitty anime dads have been called out for over and over and over again? Why not take a note from West and critically analyze the narratives you're buying into and whether or not you really consented to the role you're trying to fill, or if you're just going along with whatever friends, parents, celebrities, or favorite shonen anime told you to want? It might be hard to figure out, but one of the virtues of the shonen genre is how it shows us that if something feels hard, it's probably because it's just the start of our epic, well-composed training montage, which will come out of stronger and more equipped for the battles ahead. You and your partner, or your future anime family, deserve the best. If nothing else, I hope this video has at least helped you realize that.
Next time on Dragon Ball Z.